Yeah, thanks. And let me start my presentation. Hello, everybody. This is early morning for me. Again, as we discussed, I'm located in Japan. But I believe for most of the people that might not be the case. So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are joining. And I hope everyone is enjoying the excellent conference. And my name is Mesut. I'm a quality assurance automation engineer. And in the session, as we briefly discussed, we will talk about user-friendly test automation framework, building a user-friendly test automation framework. Because again, I believe that this is interesting because can we talk about user-friendliness for a test automation framework? So what I will discuss is, first of all, let's see what user-friendliness is in the first place. Let's discuss about what it is. And then what are the key aspects for that? And then what should we understand from the test automation point of view? This is the first part. This is the introduction part. And in the second part, what are the use cases of a test automation framework? Because if we are talking about a user friendliness, then there should be some users, right? And there should be some use cases. So who are those users using the test automation framework? And what kind of use cases they are doing, they are following. And then I will do some recommendations to craft the user-friendly test automation framework, and then we will wrap up the session. So let's get started with the first part. So the user-friendliness is basically the ease with which a person can use the system. It should be easy for users. It should be friendly to the users, letting them easily use the system. So most of the time, user-friendliness might be considered as simplicity because it should be easy, right? But most of the time, not always. So as a warm-up, as an introduction to the presentation, I want to show you some real-life example, which will be a demonstration of the Japanese websites. So when I said most of the time, user-friendliness is equal to simplicity, but not always. So Japanese websites, actually it is not only Japanese, but the Asian region design concept is not always equal to simplicity. Because when you start typing on Google, like why Japanese web, you will have some auto-completion like why it is so different, why it is so messed up, so these kind of things. Actually, it is for people who have some different backgrounds, but for these people, this is the way how it works. Let me explain what I'm trying to say. When you continue searching for how they look like, what do you realize on the screen? They are very rich, right? They are dense. They're a little bit crowded on the page. It is not very simple. It is not a simple design, but a rich context. So let's dig more and compare some different examples. For example, this is one company, the international website. This is the international one, and I'll show you the Japanese version too, so you can see the difference. So when I switch to Japanese, not only the characters, but also the menu and lots of different buttons, items are appearing here, right? So it is becoming more complex and more richer context. One more example. This is the famous Yahoo international page. Yahoo is originally from Japan, so let's see the Japanese page. So you can see how crowded it is, right? There's no even free space on the page. Every space somehow filled with some information. So there are some background, of course, and there are some reasons for this. Of course, the culture around is one of the most important aspects. For example, in Japan, there are 3 alphabets. There is hiragana, katakana, and kanji. Kanji are the symbols representing different words. And sometimes, I think there are more than 50,000 kanji symbols in the language. So you have to memorize throughout your life. It's not happening immediately, by the way. Even they are learning it in their elementary school. But for me, for example, for someone who is at some point after grown up, it is very difficult. Sometimes kanji characters side by side, I cannot realize the difference immediately. I'm comparing for some time, and eventually, when I see that, I realize there is a little tick, which is longer than the other one in one of them. So it is super tiny change, super tiny difference. But this means they are familiar with these kind of details. So this is why they expect a rich context, and they are familiar with kind of little information differences. And of course, not only that, but there are different aspects of the profiles and the users using this system. For example, in commonly, it is an aging society in Japan. And if you change the already working system, it is a little bit frustrating for the users. And of course, since they're already used to use the traditional systems, they don't want to scroll or change the view, so they want everything in one place. Like in modern designs, we have some accordion menus or drop-down menus. So you click something, there are some more buttons or more menu items opening, right? So this is not what they want. They just want, like, remember the pre-digital age, like the radio we are using, right? There are too many buttons. One is starting the play, one for pause, one is for stop, one is for rewind. So there are too many buttons. One button for one functionality. This is not the modern functionality. For example, in modern functionality, you can like change you can use the switch buttons to play or pause, not distinct or separate buttons, right? So this is what is expected here. So all what I'm trying to say is, of course, there are some general trends and some standards or general approaches, recommendations, but first of all, maybe what we should do is analyze the users and the profiles which we are delivering the product to. Of course, again, there should be some very common approaches, but there might be some exceptions too. So first of all, it is important to understand who will use our product, who will use our system, what are their expectancies. So this was just an example to a little bit illustrate the importance of our users and the target profiles. But in short, what we can say about the user-friendliness is, first of all, the system or the product that we are developing, that we are building, should be intuitive. Means allowing users how to use it. For example, if I'm building a website for a hotel reservation system, right, users should be easily reserve their room. Otherwise, if I'm not able to use it very easily, what I'll do is, oh, I didn't like this website. Okay, let's give up. Let's find another, right? This is what will happen. So they will already lose some customers. It is very easy to attract the users or the customers' attention and the ease of use. And then it should be learnable. Like even if they didn't use before, even if they are using for the first time, they should be easily learn how it works. At least the basic functionality. Of course, we might need some documentation for a complex system, but it should be easy to learn. And then efficiency, like if for a basic or maybe the most important use cases, if it is too long, if it is too complicated, then maybe we can think about easing the flows, shortening the paths, or making these steps more easier or more efficient. And error handling, even if there are some errors, some failures, then are the error messages or the instructions helpful? For example, even yesterday, I was using some websites and I got another 500 internal server error. But what does it mean? What did I do wrong? So is the system saying what I did wrong? Or how I can correct it? 500 internal server error message doesn't help me, because I still don't know how to correct my failure. I still even don't know what I did wrong. Maybe it's not my fault at all. Maybe it is really, I can already guess 500 server error is an internal error, which does not depend on my interactions. But again, it might give some more useful error messages. So error handling. Even if there are some unexpected situations, the system can easily handle it or not. So this is the error handling capability. And satisfaction. This is the overall situation. Like overall, if I'm happy with using this system or not. This is the eventual judge. So after understanding what user friendliness is or what we can expect from a user friendliness system, let's talk about it from the test automation framework point. So test automation, or basically test, is not an end product, right? But it is a product. Because, I mean, maybe the end users, our direct customers or the clients will not see it, but there will be some users using the test framework. Maybe the internal parties, or maybe even someone that we are working together with. So let's see what kind of users can use or interact with test automation framework. So first of all, there might be some people who are reading the test cases, right? It can be anyone, like even myself. Like after I write some test cases, after some time, I go back and see what I'm doing. I check the test code, and sometimes I don't remember what I'm doing, why I wrote this test in this way, right? It is very likely to forget what we are doing. So it is very important to build or write readable or understandable test code. Because even myself, sometimes I'm struggling to understand. Think about someone else. For example, if I'm reading the test written by someone else, sometimes it's really not very straightforward to understand. You have to go over the each lines or the functions being called through the test, and you have to understand overall what the test is doing. So this is reading the test. And sometimes even the product owners, even the developers are reading the test to understand what specifications or what requirements are covered by test cases and what are not. So reading the test cases might be the use case for anyone, for a developer, for a tester, for yourself, for another tester, for product owner to understand the coverage. So it is a very common use case. And writing test cases is another use case. Like we have an automation test framework and we have to implement some new test cases, right? So inside the framework that we have, we will add some more test cases. How easily we can do that? So one person can just create a new test class and start writing, right? This is the usual or very basic scenario. But of course, most of the time, it will not be that simple, because the test case will need some steps like login steps, or maybe reading the logs or doing some interactions with the systems. So most of the time, we will need to implement some new functionality. But I mean, if it is not a new functionality, if it is already existing in the framework, then am I able to reuse them? Like if someone else implemented this in another class, can I import this functionality into my function? Or should I just copy the relevant code and paste into my class? So this is not a good practice, right? Copy paste, because this will be the duplication. So the key aspect here will be reusability, modularity. Like if login function is implemented as a reusable module in some separate or allocated classes, libraries, then I can just import login and just call login with maybe the credentials, right? Username, password, whatever the credentials I'm using. But the key aspect is reusability and avoiding duplication. I will come to this point later. And then reading tests, writing tests, and executing tests. The third use case, running test cases. Who can do that? Anyone, right? After a developer writes a new test, in the previous session as well, regression test was being discussed. So whenever we write something or whenever we refactor something, then we need to run the regression test, right? Sometimes it's time consuming, but we need to do that to ensure that the changes that we are doing are not breaking anything. So a developer can run the test, a tester can run the test. Again, someone can just start test cases. But how easily we can do that? It depends on how I'm running tests. So I might be running on the command line by just typing something, or I might be using the pipeline by just starting the jobs or my stages on the pipeline. So how easily it is to start the execution, or whenever I run the test cases, is it reliable? Again, I will discuss this point too, reliability. Whenever I run the test cases, is it the results being reported are reliable or not? Whenever I have a pass result, am I really sure that it is pass? I don't have any issues or bugs which were not caught by the execution. Or whenever the test execution fails, am I sure that is it a real failure? It is not a false alarm. So this is reliability. We will come to that point too. But these are the three fundamental use cases for a test automation framework and the automated test cases. So let's get started to discuss all of them one by one, more in detail. Reading the test cases. While reading the test cases, what kind of aspects we can consider? First of all, the naming, right? Even starting with the naming of the test class itself. Okay, what is the name of this test case? When I read the name, I should already have some guesses or the interpretation of what the test is doing. Like what it is expecting, what steps it is doing, and basically what the test is written for. So use meaningful names for even the variables and the functions and classes implemented inside the test, but even starting with the name of the test, to make the code self-explanatory. Because in this way, you will not need extensive documentation, right? Because the code itself will be already clear and understandable. On top of that, comments and documentation. So using comments is actually a little bit, using too much comments is also not a good practice. So we should find the balance. Because if we are using, or if we feel that we need to comment everything, then maybe we should think that the code itself is not written very well and they are not self-explanatory. This is why we need too many comments. So of course we can put, whenever we need, some illustrations or explanations, but if we need too much, and if we feel explain what we are doing, maybe it might be a tip showing that the code itself is not understandable. And consistent coding style. Even styling makes the understanding much more easy, right? Because if the format is not consistent throughout the framework, we use one way, one approach in one place and another in another place, then it will not be consistent and the users will be confused. So we can use consistent coding style and a proper format, which makes the code or the framework understandable and readable. And one tip I would recommend is to support your documentation. Of course, we cannot put all the documentation we have inside the code, right? We can use some external systems for test management. It can be Jira, it can be TestLink, it can be TestRail, whatever. There are too many open sources as well. So you can use any of them, or you can use another one too. But what you can do is, whenever you have the step-by-step test definition or on your test management system, you can link this document, this test documentation or the test definition to your test code by some annotations. Like I'm using a tag here, and this will help you automatic reporting as well. Whenever this test code is runs or executing, after the execution finishes, you can report automatically from the framework by calling the APIs of your test management system. If the test is passed, just call the relevant report by passing a pass or fail result. And not only that, I can, as a person reading the test code, I can understand which test case is this, and I can read more details on going to the relevant test documentation on my test management system. So this will help users to refer to more detailed documentation. Because again, you cannot read everything in your test code. Don't expect like a Word documentation or a huge documentation on your test code, right? So if you have these kind of external systems, then just link it into your test code so that the users can refer to more details or further explanations in the documentations. Because sometimes it's not only simple text. We have some images, drawings, or graphics, right? So you cannot put them into test code. Just refer where you are doing those kind of explanations. Second use case, writing the test cases. Writing test cases might be implementing a new test case from scratch or refactoring an existing test code. So implementing or maintaining, refactoring. In that regard, what kind of aspects we can consider? First of all, modularity. As we briefly discussed in the beginning stage, whenever I'm writing a new functionality, I might be looking for some other implementations which were already done before. So I just want to use them again. So are they reusable? Are they modular enough to be extracted into separate classes or functions? And it will not only help me to write a new test using those, but also it will help me to refactor or maintain the test code. For example, whenever a test code fails, I want to fix the failure, right? And I realized that the developers changed something. Okay, this is cool. We are agile. We are accepting the changes. Very cool. But I have to maintain my test case. I have to fix. I have to apply the relevant changes depending on the change in the behavior of the system. And I will find where this change will affect in my test code. If I'm having duplications all over the test framework, I will change or I will apply this fix and I will apply this change to lots of different points because it was duplicated. But if I have the modular and the reusable framework or the framework components, then the single source of implementation is at one point, right? I have just one separated class and I'm calling them from lots of different places. So I will apply this fix or change on one single class. This will be super simple to fix the failure. If I have duplicated, for example, if I'm just copying and pasting login steps in all test spec files, then I will change all the spec files, right? But if I implemented login function in a separate library or a separate component, then I will fix only the relevant part. It will be way easier. And of course, we can talk about testability and adherence to standards as well to make our test automation framework easy or user-friendly for implementing or maintaining the test code. And not only this, what else? Version control, especially whenever doing the continuous refactoring. Version history and version control is very important, right? Sometimes we go back and try to understand the commits. What time, what was done, by whom, for what purpose? So we go through all the commits, we go through all the messages and all the merge requests. So version control is very important. And again, to do continuous refactoring, we get rid of the technical debt. Otherwise, if we just implement something to be fixed later, and we do not take care of this at all, then after some time there will be some technical debt, right? Because there will be more implementation based on top of this initial implementation, and since we do not fix them, we do not maintain them regularly, there will be more and more technical debt in time while we implement some new functionality. And of course, scalability and flexibility is the other aspect we can talk about in terms of implementation and maintenance. Like whenever we need to write a new functionality on mobile version instead of a desktop version, can I easily scale or flexibility adapt the existing functionality to the mobile? Maybe if I already did a very flexible test automation framework, I can just pass execution config and that's all. I don't need to do anything else because my automation framework is already flexible, supporting lots of different execution environments. All I have to do is choose my preference on the config file. Do I need to run on Safari browser, Chrome browser, Firefox, or whatever? So I just need to choose. I don't have to change the implementation, change the test code. This is how I can have a flexible and scalable test automation framework. So please think about supporting all these environments and just switching these execution parameters with a very simple config change or another approach which is user-friendly, which is easy to use, and which is efficient. This is the last dimension of the implementation and maintenance, the writing test code. And last, executing, running the test cases. So again, if I want to run the test code, for example, I might be a person using this test framework for the first time, right? I'm new to this system, so I will just try to run the test cases. How I can do that? Like it might be some test framework that I'm not super familiar with. Like it might be, let's say I'm using JavaScript and the tests are written in Python. So I don't know the commands I need to run the test cases, right? It might be PyTest or any other framework, but what I have to pass to my commands, like, okay, probably PyTest will start the test cases, but what other parameters or arguments I can include to my execution command? So all these kind of things can be documented, at least in the README file, to guide the users about illustrating how they can start the execution, because it might not be always on the command line, but sometimes they might want to start the test cases on the pipelines as well. So where or what job they should start, or which repository they should proceed, and which stage or job they should start. All these kind of things should be documented to let users easily find what they are supposed to do. And then again, flexibility, as we just discussed. And test cases should be running efficiently. So they should be fast. They should not be slowly running. But fast and slow are a little bit relative concepts, right? What is fast? If the tests are running in 10 minutes, is that fast enough? Or maybe if the test completion is 1 hour, 2 hours, is that fast? It depends, right? It depends on the coverage of the test cases and the system itself. Of course, most of the time we can say on the pipelines, it should be probably lower than 10 minutes. But this is the general concept, but it depends, depending on your system. Sometimes some longer time is also accepted. But we should ensure that regardless of the time that they are spending, they should be efficient. If there are something we can improve, if there are some dummy ways, for example, we don't need, we should eliminate them to faster and to make our execution more efficient. And then troubleshooting. Whenever the test case fails, can we easily detect the reason of the failure? Again, this is related to the reliability, because if the test case is reporting a pass, then I should be confident that, okay, the test passed, so the system is working well. If they are not reliable, maybe I should think that my test passes, but there might be some issues which the test case is not catching, is not capable of finding the issues, right? Because this means my test case is not that much reliable. We will talk about this more in the next slides. But this is the overall idea of giving a user-friendly test automation framework from the execution point of view. Yes, reliability. So there are too many code smells, right? Code smell types. And similarly, we can talk about too many test smell types as well. So I will not go through all of them, but you might already be familiar with the most common ones, like the fragile test case or the flaky test case, one-time passing, one-time failing, or the coverage issues. So there are too many reliability issues. But very basically, the idea is that if the test pass is reporting a failure, then it should be a real bug because the test phase is failing. Otherwise, it should be a false alarm, meaning the test report fails, but normally there were no issues in the feature. The feature was working as expected. So this means it is not a real bug, but it is a false alarm. And why is it important? Think about I pushed the new implementation or a new test case to my pipeline and it stopped. The pipeline stopped. It did not merge into production because the test case failed. But then I realized that normally it was not a real bug. It was a flaky test case. But I already stopped the pipeline. It already slowed me down. Right? I will lose some time. Time is critical. Sometimes I'm doing the hot fixes. Users are already facing a problem in the production environment. So since I have a flaky test case, okay, the pipeline stopped. Let's start over. It will be already some waste of time. So it is important to be aware of this kind of test smells we might have and already get some precautions to get rid of those. Or even if we have such kind of cases, we should be implementing maintainable test cases in which we can easily fix those kind of issues. So let's talk about some recommendations. For example, the first use case was reading the test cases, right? And we talked about readability and understandability. So what can we do to improve these aspects? First of all, we can use some tools which can already help us automatically to fix the styling errors, the styling issues, or to using a standard format. So we can use some linters or beautifiers. There are too many tools we can, or too many plugins we can use in our IDEs or even in the pipelines. We can build some pre-commit hooks so they are already checked even before pushing to the pipelines. And on top of that, we can already use some recommended patterns which provide a good developer experience. For example, behavior-driven design. This will already help users to read what is done in the test code, right? Because they have a standard pattern. Most of the people are already familiar with. Given something, when you do something, then you expect this. Given when, then pattern, right? This is a standard pattern. This will help people to understand because this is something that they are very familiar with and it will be easier for them to read. I'm not saying we should do that 100%. It's not 100% must, but it might be an idea to improve our code in terms of readability and the understandability. And again, I'm repeating myself in terms of duplication and reusability, but if we have exactly the same code appearing in lots of different places, whenever we need to fix something on that specific code, it will be very difficult to apply the fix on multiple places. It will be not only the duplication of effort, but also the duplication of the quality issues and again, waste of time. So let me illustrate you what we can do to improve the duplication issues or maybe to create a reusable framework. So in this example, I want to demo one test scenario, which is a super simple test scenario. In this test case, people are going to a website and clicking a button, and then whenever they click the button, they want to assert the label on the button. Okay, so finding a button, speaking in terms of the test automation, finding a locator, finding an element, which is a button, and then doing the interaction, click, and then do the assertion. should have some text. So three steps, very simple, very short test case. But even if for this simple and short test case, there might be multiple variations that we can do in terms of automation. For example, these 4 profiles are, even if they are using the same framework, for example, they are doing the coding in JavaScript with Cypress test automation tool or the framework, but still, even with the same configuration, they can do the implementation in 4 different ways. I'm sure this is not all the ways that they can do, but at least we can see 4 different ways. And there might be some code issues since they are not following the same patterns. They are not following the standard approach, which was already verified in terms of the quality issues. Some of them might have some anti-patterns because they are not following the standard approach. So what we can do is, instead of implementing this functionality from scratch, what if we have a reusable module? We can release a library, or we can already create a class or another functionality which can be imported into other classes, so that they will not have to implement the functionality from scratch. Just call the relevant implementation with their inputs, with their parameters. So in this way, it will remove the quality issues and everyone will be following the same approach. And then, on top of the duplication or the reusability, of course, we discussed about test execution efficiency, right? It should not be very slow because time is precious. Sometimes we are waiting in front of the pipelines, waiting it to pass. And it is really, if it is slow, then we start complaining about it, right? Why do I have to wait too long for these test cases? So what can we do is, we can analyze, we can do a time analysis on test basis, so we can understand which test case is running slowly compared to the others. And we can already create some suites, test sets, by combining different test cases together and maybe separating the slow tests into other suites, and then we can start them executing parallelly. So we can do the parallelization. And again, after we do the time analysis, if we find out there are some improvement rooms we can do, then just try to fix those kind of efficiency issues. So, summarizing what we discussed. We discussed about user-friendliness of a test automation framework, right? Because test automation framework is not the end product, but it is a product. There are users using the test code in terms of reading, writing, refactoring, maintaining, or executing the test cases. And there are some key aspects we should keep in mind, because quality is not only the functionality, but also there are lots of different non-functional aspects too. Readability, maintainability, reliability, efficiency. So what we can do is, we can follow different standards or recommendations, and we can get help from different tools or plugins or the automated patterns. And then we can even do some peer review activities to think about these improvement ideas. And we can do a time analysis on the execution of test cases to understand which test case is failing the most. If one of the test cases is very flaky compared to the others, then let's focus on this specific test case and try to understand why it is flaky. There might be some issues that we can fix. If that is the case, apply the fix. Otherwise, try to understand if this issue is stemming from the system itself, then we might follow a different approach to verify that functionality. And of course, we can do an efficiency analysis too, which test case is spending too much time, which is running relatively faster. So this kind of analysis will help us a lot to finding out the improvement rooms. So please keep in mind, there are too many quality issues that we can consider, and we can even improve on the test automation framework. And after finding out them, please try to apply your fixes and try to communicate with others and try to get some feedback. Whenever you have a test automation, get some feedback about how understandable it is, how efficient, or in general, how the code quality looks like. So this will help us a lot to improve our test automation framework. So thank you so much for listening to me, and I guess we might have some time for